Hi, I'm Hal Austin. I want to talk to you a little bit about the B-47 aircraft. The Boeing took a stretched technology significantly back in the right after World War II to build an airplane that pushed the heck out of technology. The swept-back wing, as an example, was one of the major technology pushing of the swept-back wing. It's also a flex wing and a bicycle-type landing gear. All that stuff, and also multi-engines. All this was brand new technology in the late 1940s, and the airplane was put into production in the early 1950s. The significant part of the technology, most significant part, is probably the flex wing and the swept back wing, which is the granddaddy of them all. Now, this airplane was flying more than 10 years before the 707 even thought about coming along. We're still in prop airplanes for civilian flying at that point in time. Now, I've made several notes here to make sure I keep on track. We're talking about this B-47. It was a great airplane for its time, especially. Now, I flew the B-47, RB-47, and E, which is a reconnaissance version of it, and as an instructor pilot, aircraft commander, and maintenance test flight pilot, attaining some 2,000 hours in the airplane between 1953 and 1958 at Lockburn Air Force Base just south of Columbus, Ohio. The B-47 actually is the second multi-engine jet airplane developed by the United States. The first one was the B-45, RB-45C, which was also a reconnaissance airplane, four-engine jet that was developed and produced before the B-47. Now, I flew that airplane also at Barksdale in 1950 to 54, and then we moved to Lockburn Air Force Base in Ohio during that same time frame. The B-47, as I mentioned, was built by Boeing. Their first flight was on the anniversary date of the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. This was in 1947. If you'll recall, the first flight at Kitty Hawk was in 1903. Well, this was flown on the anniversary of that on purpose. Both the B-45 and the B-47 were equipped with the flying boom type air refueling system. And initially, were refueled by modified B-29s called the KB-29, then the KC-97, and then later the KC-135, which is still flying today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the significant part of the swept-back wing, when the B-47 becomes the granddaddy of them all, because all the commercial jet airplanes been built since the B-47 have used the swept-back wing. And that's what the significance of the swept-back wing is. It changed the commercial flying from coast to coast in the United States in a matter of hours. The Strategic Air Command's B-47s, and with a nuclear capable, standing a 15-minute alert, was the primary early Cold War deterrent, making the Soviets think twice before they even considered attacking the United States. By the way, the B-47, there are some 1,800 B-47s built altogether. Most of them were bombers, but there was quite a few reconnaissance airplanes. Both the B-47 was a bomber, the RB-47E was a visual photo, which I flew, my flying time was mostly in, and then the B-47H, which was an electronic intelligence gathering device. Now, one of the differences in the B-47H, the normal crew of the B-47 was three: an aircraft commander, co-pilot, and a navigator. The same crews on the B-47H with the ELINT intelligence gathering, but they had a three-person Raven crew, they called, in a modified Bombay collecting data. The B-47 crew cabin was pressurized. was pressurized, and normal operating altitudes were in the area of 25 to 40,000 feet. A typical training mission, unrefueled, not air refueled, was on the order of 5 to 7 hours, and some of the training flights were 16 to 20 hours. On those flights, we took off from bases in the United States, flew to simulated targets in Europe, North Africa, and landed then in North Africa or in England. Now, those missions run 16 to 20 hours and with multiple refuelings. The normal operating speeds, the B-47s, run neighborhood of 375 to 420 knots, and they had a range of about 2,800 miles unrefueled, to max at about 8 hours flying time. Okay, let's do a little walk around the airplane. Okay, on the walk around the airplane, the pre-flight system, typical of almost any other airplane. You want to see if it's all one piece, check your fuel loads, the bomb load or whatever load you're carrying. In our case with the reconnaissance airplanes, you're catching all the cameras. And the cameras, by the way, on the B-45 and the B-47 were very similarly equipped in the 1950s. They had trimetricon cameras, 9-inch focal length cameras for area, so that the intelligence guy looking at the film could figure out where you've been or where you are. And then you had the K-38, 36-inch focal length cameras for targets, detailed information for they were all black and white. In the nose of the RB-47E, we had a forward black camera for low-level flight work. And of course, all the B-47s carried an 015 camera for pictures of the radar scope screen for future use for bomb aiming. Now, on the pre-flight, check the engines, and they're different than the old prop engines before this one. You didn't worry as much about fuel leaks or oil leaks and that sort of thing, because the jet engine made a lot of that. You had to forget a whole lot of that. The hydraulic leaks, the hydraulic boost systems, those kind of things you did check on the pre-flight walk around to be sure that the fuel level or the fluid levels were what they should be. And of course, your fuel, the only way you could check that really was on the gauges inside the cockpit. Again, on the pre-flight, the bomb bay doors on this airplane we have at the museum here obviously are closed for obvious reasons. But in there, and if it's a bomber, you're checking for all the stuff associated with the nuclear weapons and our iron bombs. This airplane was also used for iron bomb some during the Vietnam War. But in the recce version, the reconnaissance version photos, all of our cameras were set up just after that. And so you had to check to be sure all the airlines and so forth that kept those cameras from fogging up at altitude and so forth, be sure they were all working correctly. And we had tail guns on the airplane and the 20-millimeter cannon on all the E models. So you check to be sure that worked back there. Now the guns themselves are remotely controlled from the cockpit by the co-pilot. His seat turns around backwards, and he has a radar control for the guns to point and look at you. The envelope of the guns were 20 degrees either side of horizontal with the tail of the airplane, and 45 degrees either side of the tail and swinging this way. That was the limits on the things. Oh, this airplane's got some modifications in the back here where cameras, some test cameras and that sort of thing were installed. That was not routine. There is one thing that's routine on the B-47, though, and that's the battery system. We had the airplane set up so you could start engines using the batteries, the NICAD batteries, which were also new technology at that time. And they were back here. Occasionally, one of them blew up, and when you did, you had a heck of a mess with all the acid and everything in the back of the airplane. So you always check back in there. There's an excess hatch here, so you check those batteries. But usually you let the ground crews guys check that. Now, other than that, the airplane was a lot simpler on pre-flight than your old prop airplanes were. Okay, sitting in the cockpit of the B-47, let me go over just a little bit of the stuff in here. And I remember the first time I ever looked at one of these cockpits like this, I said, my gosh, I'll never figure out what all that stuff is. Well, the significant thing in this airplane is you got 6 engines, so you got 6 engine instruments, so that takes a lot of room. You've got a number of fuel tanks, and they're all over and on this side here. The co-pilot also has a set of these, so he can see those as well. So checking fuel, making sure that your balance of fuel as you fly, you got to keep moving it around or be sure it moves around like it's supposed to, so that you keep the airplane in balance. So all that has to be done over here. You got the 6 throttles here. For air refueling, you typically would use the center 4 engines to work to maintain your contact position behind the tanker. So that's why they're elevated here. You can raise these up also to make that work even handier. Then the flight instruments, nowadays they're much more modern than these. They're all basic flight instruments that were used in World War II. That's one of the things that technology hadn't caught up with by the time the B-47 was built. The flight instruments themselves were all developed in World War II, all effective and useful. And up here, you got your fire warning lights for all 6 engines. And in the early days of the B-47, we used to get those lights coming on when there wasn't anything more than vibration, the way they were set up and so forth. So sometimes that was a confusion factor. Okay, we had the radar scope was right in this area here. The navigator could appear this way into the thing with a where it cut out all the other lights so you could see what was going on in there. And this is the K-system radar system, which was also a push in technology ahead of previous airplanes as well. But the radar scope was not only the navigation system primarily, but it was the 015 camera. You took pictures of this when they wanted to for targeted information. That's where you you could focus in on bringing it closer and so forth for targeted information for radar bombing, which is our primary method in SAC of doing the bombing. All these other instruments and so forth are designed to keep up with the navigation. You got a true airspeed indicator, heading, obviously, of course, and a number of these other instruments are all designed to help him do his navigation. Now, no readings of these were transferred upstairs, so you're depending on the navigator. The pilots were on the navigator for all navigation stuff, except for the radios. You could use where you use the ground position radios that the FAA ran. All the pilots operate all those. The navigator could do that also down here, but primarily the radar scope was the key to everything he did down here. Now in the reconnaissance version of this thing, this panel over here was all set up for the cameras, to operate all the cameras. I'm not sure what these are on the bomber over here right now, but that panel was right here for the navigator in those days. And that's where you operated the switches for the area cameras. You'd run those for whatever area you wanted, so the intelligence guys could figure out where you've been. And then you have the target cameras, which that film ran pretty fast on the thing, so you had to sort of meter the amount of film you'd use over a particular target, depending on how many targets you had that day. But that's essentially it. The navigator was in a hole up here. That's the only way to describe it. I don't want to attempt to turn that seat. In fact, they do have the scope cover here for the guns. And then the switches are all over here. Oh, one other thing you might you take a picture if you want to. These four levers here were for the four landing gear. The two middle ones was the main gear, the bicycle main gear, and the two outside were the outriggers that were on the ground. The outriggers kept the wingtips from dragging. So, if you had lost a complete power and hydraulic both of the airplane, you could get the gear down here manually with these switches, with these levers. By the way, when pilot checkout, we checked out pilots, the co-pilots especially, they had to literally do that in flight. Well, it's hard to turn all the power and hydraulics off, but they had to get in and pump these things. And I forget how many strokes it takes, but for the main gear, it's something like 50 strokes of that thing back and forth before you get the gear down. Now, any discussion of me with the B-47 has to include my special overflight mission over the Soviet Union on May 8, 1954. So I need to talk about that just a little bit. We were, as I had mentioned earlier, we were based at Lockburn Air Force Base, Ohio, and we did temporary duty in England frequently at Fairford RAF station, where we usually went with the B-47. And the tankers, our tankers would usually join us over there too, so in case we had an emergency ward or something like that, we needed the tankers with us as well. But they would be at Mildenhall, RAF station. On May 8, 1954, we had a typical crew briefing at early in the morning. We got to the airplanes about 7 o'clock in the morning and took off around 7:30. And the flight of 6 airplanes, 3 going along the western side of the Scandinavian Peninsula, north out of England, refueling opposite Stavanger, Norway. Our tankers would be positioned about 50 to 100 miles off the coast. That's where we would meet them to refuel. For training flights, or in this particular day, I was doing an overflight mission. Out of the 6 airplanes, we were the only one going. During the pre-flight briefing, I asked, are we the only ones going? And the 2 colonels from SAC that were briefing us there, one intelligence and one operations, said, yeah, you guys are it. So our procedures were going flying along the western side of the Scandinavian Peninsula, and then turning east across the northern extent of the Scandinavian Peninsula to a point about 100 miles north of Murmansk. And at that point, the other airplanes turned around and proceeded back to Fairford. But our mission was to turn south at that point and to cover 9 airfields. That area was the primary entrance for the SAC bomber fleet in the event of World War III. Would be across through what we used to refer to as the northwest corner of the Soviet Union. So Murmansk, Archangels, that area was the primary entry point. So knowing the air order of battle of how many and what kind of fighters were deployed, the Soviets had deployed, and the radar control they had, so to know when the penetration was occurring, and the number of airfields that were operational in that area are very important to the military of the United States and the United States government on what needed to be done. Particularly interest to SAC, because John LeMay, Commander-in-Chief SAC in those days, and he had to know what that air order battle was in order to commit his airplanes to go through there in the event of World War III. So we coasted in over Murmansk. We were told to climb to 40,000 feet because the MiG-17 was supposed to be the MiG-15 rather, was supposed to be the only airplane deployed yet in numbers. But the MiG-17, we knew the Soviets had those coming along. So the intelligence briefing said 40,000 feet, you can outrun the MiG-15. If the MiG-17s are there, they have a look and shoot capability only with fighters, so that makes them very unstable at 40,000 feet. So we climbed at altitude a little bit too heavy for our weight, a little bit too heavy for that altitude, I should say, to climb to 40,000, but we did. Penetrated over Murmansk, and our first two airfields were in the vicinity of Murmansk. We took pictures of those airfields, proceeded on towards Archangels. There were two more airfields in that vicinity. We had a total of 9 to cover all together, and 4 of them were in the vicinity of Murmansk and Archangels. So we took pictures of those, and so far so good. The weather was absolutely beautiful. One of the reasons, no doubt, they had us flying that day was because you could see forever. So we got those pictures out of the way, but all of a sudden, the co-pilot noticed, and I had him on the lookout for fighters, and noticed some airplanes coming up on our left-hand side. Well, they probably weren't armed and were not at our altitude, so they didn't stay around very long. As we got near Archangels, though, a flight of 2 flights of 3, 6 airplanes were up, and they're at our altitude. And here we are at 40,000 feet, and it can't be MiG-15s, I don't think. So anyway, we were not sure what they were. At a distance, the MiG-15, MiG-17 doesn't look that much different. As we passed Archangels, got the 5th airfield, as we turned southwest over Archangels area for the 5th airfield, here comes another flight of 6 airplanes, 2 flights of 3, that's the way they operated. And again, they're on the left-hand side coming across and staying out on the left-hand side of the airplane and out far enough so they knew exactly the size of our envelope for our tail guns. They knew that they had to stay outside of 45 degrees either side of the tail and 20 degrees up or down on that tail. They knew exactly the size of that envelope. They made sure that they were always outside of that. So after we got about the 5th airfield and we're moving along, here comes another flight of 2 flights of 3. And all of a sudden, I see tracers going above and below the canopy, and I could see it out here. And I said, "Whoops! Those guys are shooting at us." So Holt had my co-pilot, Col Holt, had to operate those guns by the seat turned around backwards. Well, he had turned around then and had the radar up, and it's a kind of a look and shoot capability a little bit with this airplane too, because it was still a new airplane in those days. The gunnery system, the tail guns, that's the only place where guns. Were not operational yet. Had a lot of bugs in them. Any new piece of equipment, that's the way it normally is. But anyway, I said, well, you better start getting those guns to fire back there. So he did. They fired for about 2 seconds and quit. Well, the Soviet fighter pilots didn't know that they quit and wouldn't fire again, but they made sure they stayed outside that envelope. So as this 2 flights of 3, we think was number 4, probably the lead of the second flight, got a lucky hit. It actually hit our airplane in the left wing. We're in a left-hand turn anyway, going to our next target, and come through the left wing, a 23 millimeter shell, which the Soviets used, and it was an explosive type shell. When we got back on the ground, the hole on top of the wing was about 4 inches across. The bottom wing about a foot across, and then had shrapnel all in the left side of the airplane. Fortunately, the self-sealing tanks worked, but more about that later. The only way we knew we got hit was because the intercom went out. Well, the radio gear and the intercom gear is located more or less under where we are here in the pilot seat, and atop of the main forward main gear. Well, the radio gear is there, and intercom is there, and then a tandem airplane with a navigator sitting out here about 6 feet in front of you, the co-pilot back here, and we did have a mirror in the airplane at that time, so the co-pilot and I could see each other. But without an intercom, and remember we were at 40,000 feet, and when we realized they're shooting at us, I firewalled these engines to get all the speed we could, let down 40,000 feet a little bit to pick up additional 20 knots indicated airspeed, which no doubt probably saved our bacon. But again, the only reason we knew we got hit is no big shaking of the airplane. It does a lot of shaking at that altitude anyway, but we lost the intercom. Well, the tail guns weren't working anyway, so I had Holt get down in the aisle and relay the direction information from the navigator on how to turn to our next target. because the airplane later on, you could turn the autopilot over to the navigator and he could do a bomb run. But the early airplanes didn't have that capability yet, so I had to manually fly the airplane and direction so forth that the navigator wanted. So Holt's down here yelling back and forth on it, and that's the way we got through our remaining targets. We had 2 more batch of airplanes come at us, one of which fired at us. The third batch, they probably weren't armed. They were up at our altitude, MiG-17s, no two ways about it. But they probably weren't armed, so there was no shooting at that. But after we finished our last target, and by the way, we're about 700 some miles over Soviet territory, about an hour and 45 minutes. And as we're coasting out or going out over Finland, that last batch of airplanes, and by the way, all these MiGs only stayed with us maybe 10 minutes at the most. They didn't have that enough fuel to stay with us much longer than that. So as we're approaching Finland, one of the guys is probably the lead of the last batch of airplanes, got up on our right wing, sat there, and he kept tilting his back towards us that way. Well, 40 years later, I found out that the Soviet tactics were, if they could shoot an intruder down, they were supposed to ram the airplane to knock it out of the sky. Well, this guy didn't have it. If that was his instructions, he didn't have guts enough to do it because we're here talking about it today. But anyway, that was a real thrill. And a couple of days later, the local papers were carrying the story that the Finland government was very upset because there was airplanes, foreign airplanes over their territory shooting at each other on the 8th of May. That's when we flew it. Anyway, we managed to get back to the UK. We had a standby tanker at Milton Hall on the ground. And we're running a little behind our flight plan. We're not sure what all has happened, just have an intercom. And all of this has been done radio silent up to this point anyway. But we had a standby tanker also off of Stavanger, Norway, that we were to contact if we needed him. So I started to decide we better call. The navigator and co-pilot both decided we ought to do that. I tried to call him and the radio was not working. At least it, at best, was working intermittently. I did hear something like the call sign of the tanker leaving the area. Again, Holt's down on the aisle, passing information back between the navigator and I. And he says, well, that's about the time they should be leaving the area if we didn't show up. We're the only airplane, by the way. All the other airplanes have returned to the UK on time. So we climbed up to 43,000 feet and pulled the power back a little bit to try to swap fuel for time. And then we had a ground alert airplane at Milton Hall, so about 100 miles north of the Wash in England. Milton Hall is not too far south of that. I started calling in the blind for our tanker, and they were our own tankers in those days. We all knew each other. And the aircraft commander recognized my voice and got his KC-97 airborne. In the meantime, we had decided we could probably get on the ground at Milton Hall with the fuel we had left. And by the way, Carl Holt passed away a few years ago, but he swore till the day he died that the gauges over here on the fuel tank had quit wiggling by the time we got behind that tanker. But all 6 engines are still running, and we got our 10,000 pounds of fuel, kicked off the tanker, and went on to Fairford and landed. Did a radio-out procedure for the landing at Fairford. And when we parked, we started to put the gear down and the flaps down. We were hoping everything was going to work like it's supposed to. Well, it did. Like I say, we still didn't know why we lost our intercom or why the radio was not working properly until we got on the ground, and the crew chief came up to shoot the walkway down here, right here, stuck his head up here and said, boy, you sure hit a big bird someplace. You got a hole in the left wing. Well, we were anxious to get out and see the hole in the left wing. I described it previously, about 4 inches on top, about a foot in the bottom, shrapnel all into the left wing, some 30 or 40 holes, and the maintenance guys cut out a piece of the skin about yay big, about 9 inches across, of one of the bigger holes in that forward main tank area, and made me a president of that some 2 or 3 months after we get back to the States. But anyway, we were told later on by General May came by Lockman Air Force Base and give us all 2 DFCs. He said, you're entitled to a Silver Star, but 2 things would happen. He says, I can authorize DFCs, but it says if to get the Silver Star, it has to go to Washington, and 2 things would happen to it. Now, you got to understand, know General May to appreciate what he's saying here. He said 2 things would happen. He said, first off, Washington would screw it up. But the main thing is there'd be too many people want to know why that have no need to know about this mission. By the way, the mission had to be approved personally by President Eisenhower, who was president at the time, because we're committing an act of war by overflying during the Cold War. And so that's why he had to know about it, just in case we had some violent reactions. Very briefly, that was a May 8, 1954 flight. And we contributed to the war effort that way, and we were told that we had all 9 airfields well. They found MiG-17s deployed in numbers. They hadn't known that before. They thought the MiG-17 had not yet been deployed in numbers. And it was capable of getting to altitudes for the B-47s in case we had to go to World War III. Now, a little bit more about the cockpit of this airplane. We showed you before the navigator down the nose here. That's where the radar is, and all the navigation was done from down there. All the cameras were operated from down there, and he had all the detailed mission report down there. And as we and it's kind of unhandy, but with intercom, you know, it was okay. Normally, communication with each other was just fine. Now, the co-pilot, on the other hand, he had the fuel controls, all the fuel control back there, although it could be controlled from the front as well, but normally he controlled the fuel back there, and to operate the tail guns, he had to be in the rear position. Anyway, 3-man crew, a lot of things to keep up with in this airplane. It was a push to technology all the way across. Remember, this is, we're doing all of this 10 years before the jets, the initial 707 as an example, became a routine civilian airliner. We're talking about 10 years before that. I think it just about wraps it up. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rudy Lerma, and today is December 15, 2009, and what we're working on is a B-47. More or less give you an idea of how we do the stuff of the balls here. We don't have any details anymore, so what we have to do is we have to paint the stars and balls. An old template that I have. If you can see that there's some holes cut into the template. And what I do is I figure out where the stencil or the stone bar is going to go here by looking at pictures of airplanes and stuff like that, other airplanes. I use the walk-arounds, and I come out and with my pencil and my logo and everything, I go ahead and draw the outline. And you can see here, we can zoom in here, you can see where I've already drawn the outline of the star and bar. After I draw the star and bar, which you see here already drawn, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to tape right on the line, on the outside of the line, on the star, and on the white bars. You have 2 white bars and 1 red bar. Down here is the outline of it, and it's blue, as you can see on this template here. The top of it is going to be blue. right in here, this here is going to be blue. And of course, the star is going to be white. So what I would do, next step, since I've already drawn it out, like I said, is to outline all the white. Mask off everything else here. Then I'll put the primer on first, and that's with spray can. And then after I do the primer on the white, I'll let it dry for 1 day. And I come out the next day, and then I'll paint the white while it's still masked up. And once I do all the white, then I'll wait 1 day, and I'll do the red. And once I do the red, then I'll have to wait 1 full day, and then I'll do the right here, all in here, right in here, and right in here. This right, the bars right here have to be they have to be all taped off and masked off so that no blue will hit the white and the red. And basically that's how you get the red, white, and blue. If you notice, like I said, I have holes in here. These are my guidelines to make the star, the points of the star. And the ball. Let's get out there. It's putting out the star is done. Another video, I'll probably be able to show you how I mask off the star. Okay. All right. So mask it off on the outside first. Just like that. I'll mask it right on the line. That creates the outline of the star. This is the outside. This is going to be the outside of the star. This will all be painted down. This is what's going to be painted in here. Even stuff. On this one, what I do, on this next cabin, is what I do is that the white, the star bar is going to be painted white. The bars are going to be painted white also. So, mask all the way across. My elbow's in the way there. I'll fix that in a minute. Okay, so there you have the star right here. This is going to be trimmed. This is going to be trimmed twice. It'll be trimmed right here and here. And paint the blue all the way up to here. That'll be trimmed. Now you notice that these here, the middle bar looks like it's narrower than these two. That's because I'm doing the outside. This is the outside. It's down this here. So once I do the primer here and here inside the star, and I'll go ahead and paint the next day I'll paint the white on there. Paint the white here, paint the white here. Once that is dry, then I come back and I hit it with the white right here after the primer. And I have to wait 1 day for the paint to dry because it's still sticky and the paint on it will come out. I just move the paint down. Now you see, this is the way these work. Okay, so you'll have equal, they'll all be the same size. Okay, and that's how you do this. What I'm going to do the outside, complete outside. Again, you have to make the circle. This tape right here, is just regular masking tape. But I'll use over here this plastic tape. Make this line right here.
Okay, so what I just did is I put the primer on there first, and then I got the white after the primer dried. So I'm going to do this white over here on this side, and then on the bars over here on this side. And then once I do that, I let that dry for about a day or so. And once it dries good, then I'll do the red. So anyway, that's how we do this. Okay. And it's better to use these little trigger type things because I noticed on the other side I've had a couple of runs, and with this thing here it makes the paint come out like in a mist. As opposed to using your finger, you get more paint on there when you're using your finger. This is a lot better. Plus you get a gloss on it. Okay, I'm gonna do the stripes now, the white stripes here. Just now it's using back and forth motion. Try to cover all the primer. It's a little windy today, but not too bad. We can't do this early in the morning because the airplane surface will be too cold. So we have to wait in the afternoon, but then of course then we have to fight the wind. There you go. Now after this process here, these two lines will come off right here. And once the white dries, you know, I'll be able to mask over the white so I can paint the red. After that, I got to mask off on this line here. Mask all of this in here and mask the star and paint the blue. This will be blue here, like I showed on the other video. This will be blue right in here. This will have to be trimmed. It'll be trimmed perfect so that you get equal squares on there for your or rectangles for your stars. Okay. I don't think I missed any. Maybe a little bit here. Okay. Anyway, that's the white now. All we gotta do is paint the red and the blue. The primer was put on there about 15 minutes ago, but because it's so warm out today, the primer's already dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the white on it and get ahead of the game here a little bit. Always be sure to shake the pan real good. Okay. You can tell it's brown real fast. Okay. What I like about the ladder, it can go on either side.
See the outline of the star there, and let me get my ladder on this side.
What I'll do is I'll just take the tape off.
What I'm doing now is I'm just taking this tape off so I can catch any flaws that I might have on there right now. And I'll catch them before I finish, before I go on to the next color. So everything seems to be looking okay so far. This is the tricky part right here. Oh, shoot. I have to do that one real quick. Right there where the paint stuck, the tape stuck to it. Okay. That's what happens sometimes. Yeah. But you know, just touch it up and it'll fix. It's a quick fix. Now the red once the white dries, then I'll be this tape here where it was before is going to go on the white and then on the white here, so that I can paint the red in there. Once you get the red and the blue in there, the colors really stand out. Okay, that's we're halfway there.
I am Dick Van Roos. I'm painting this B-47 airplane. The museum has owned it a long time, and it was in need of paint for the past 10 years. So we decided to start on it. It's about a 4-month project. Rudy and I are working together on it. At the time, I'm putting on a coat which they call gripper. Gripper sticks to aluminum and any shiny surfaces there are. So we used to have a lot of trouble with paint peeling. And because this will hold on, paint will stick to this gripper a lot better than anything else we do. I'm about half finished with it, and we're up to 25 gallons of paint. So this aircraft will take about 50 gallons of paint to paint. It's a 116-foot wingspan, so it's a large airplane. We've had several people at the museum that have flown this model when it was in Marchfield here, and we're kind of happy to get it done. It'll make it last a lot longer. It didn't have very much corrosion in it. The corrosion we had, we sanded out of there, and then we put this primer sealer on there, and hope the airplane will last another 25, 30 years outside, like the 50 years that it's been sitting outside already. Anyway, that's about all there's to it.
Okay, well, here we are at the B-47 one more time, and what you see here is the final product. Remember, we did the white first, and then we masked the white, and then we painted the red, and then we masked everything, the red and the white, and then we outlined the blue first, and masked everything off so we wouldn't get any overspray, and we painted the blue on there. I painted the blue on there, and this is the final product right here. And we've gotten a lot of compliments. Everybody thinks it's a decal, but it's not. We don't have any decals anymore, like I said earlier, and so we have to paint them on. And you'll see these are all painted on the new. As we paint an airplane, we paint the stars and bars over again. And there's, like I said earlier, there was different sizes. This is about a 50, 60 inch star and bar. The smallest one that I've ever done is a 20. And anyway, this is the final touch right here, and it's for people to enjoy. And people come by and see these airplanes and see what we're doing out here. That's about it. Thank you for your cooperation and your understanding. Sorry it took so long to finish this, It usually takes about 4 days to do the whole star and bar, but weather permitting, we can finish it. If the weather doesn't cooperate, then it takes about anywhere from about 3 days to a month, maybe. So that's it right there. Thank you very much.